So one of the questions that I get frequently is how do we understand people in addiction? And you know, even my own beloved family members ask me, I just don't understand what happened to you. I don't understand how it could get that bad. And one of the things I found helpful, and I had to learn this myself when I was in treatment, was some of the basic science of addiction and what's going on in the brain. So what happens in addiction, in general, in a normal brain, you've got two major parts that we're talking about when it comes to addiction. And the more primitive part of the brain, or what we call the reptilian brain, is the earliest to evolve in man. And then we have the outermost part of the brain, the part that sits right above the eyes, called the prefrontal cortex. That's the more evolved part. That's what separates us from other mammals. So we like to describe the more primitive part of the brain, the central part of the brain, as the part of the brain that drives our instincts, instinctual behaviors, our fight or flight response, our drives for food, reproduction, shelter, oxygen, etc. And the prefrontal cortex, the more evolved part of the brain, is what I like to call the professor. So this is the part of the brain that makes you good at your job. This is the part of the brain that helps you make rational decisions. This is the part of the brain that helps you weigh consequences before you make a decision. And normally there is a complex interplay between these parts of the brain. The brain loves it's a big word called homeostasis, but it loves to be in balance. So normally these two parts of the brain are in balance at all times. So for instance, someone pulls out in front of you on the highway and they're merging in very quickly without warning. So instantly, without thinking cognitively about it, your heart rate goes up, you start to breathe faster, and you feel kind of that emotion and fear welling up. That is the normal primitive part of your brain revving up instantly to help protect you and get you out of danger. That's what it serves in that situation. The more cognitive part of your brain is the part of the brain that kicks in after the person passes you and you realize that you're safe and you start thinking about what just happened and processing exactly what just happened to you, and then you're able to calm down and move on and continue driving. So that's an example of an interaction where those two parts of the brain work in balance. Sometimes the primitive part is in active play and the cognitive part is less active, but eventually they do come into balance. What happens in addiction, unfortunately, is that over time, the communication between the prefrontal cortex, or the more evolved rational part of our brains, essentially breaks down between the communication essentially breaks down between the prefrontal cortex and the more primitive part of our brain. So essentially in active addiction, as it progresses to a severe substance use disorder, we are acting pretty much primarily and solely on that more primitive part of our brain. And the way I describe it to people is, when people ask me what it was like in active addiction, is that pill for me, and it was a pill in my situation, but it can be any substance or behavior, became like oxygen to me. And oxygen is a basic need. So you have this drive, this overwhelming craving and drive for oxygen. If there's someone drowning, they're going to do whatever they need to do to scrap to the surface, to swim and claw and scratch to get to the surface to get that oxygen. And that's what in active addiction many people describe it as, is that substance or that behavior became like oxygen to them, that they truly believe that they needed it. And in part, it's because that more primitive part of the brain is no longer communicating with the more rational part of the brain. So we're living in this all gas pedal part of the brain, and the brake pedal, the more rational part of our brain that helps us predict consequences of our behavior, is effectively offline. It's essentially nowhere to be found.